Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench. Hello there, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
Hello, welcome back to Fighting on Film. As we approach the big 150 next week, we thought we'd pack a couple of films around the 150, detailing some of the movies that have been on the Fighting on Film Google Drive since we started the show in 2021.
Yeah.
If you're a long-time listener, if you're a short-term listener, we might as well explain it. So when we started the show, we made this database of like 100 odd films, and it's pretty much been untouched. We haven't really used it. So every now and then we kind of dip in, we go, oh yeah, that one will work. Matt's
we continually add to it, but we do not subtract to it.
Yes, exactly.
That's the problem.
And Matt has been wanting to do The Real Glory for a while. He's pitched it as a Patreon pick for a few times, and it's sort of kind of flown under the radar. So we'll dust this one off and give it a watch. So yeah, this week's film is The Real Glory.
It's a really interesting one because it covers a topic that you really wouldn't expect 1930s Hollywood to cover.
Yeah,
and it's a conflict that hasn't really been, looked at in film before or since. And it's the first film to tackle the Filipino insurrection, the Moro Rebellion.
Yeah. But interestingly, the first time I ever heard
US.
about this war was in a Playboy magazine from the 60s.
No way.
That I bought to do my Vietnam reenactment with. And it had like a little write-up about one of the big battles in there, which was really interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
Crazy.
The heft just being like, yeah, get that Moro Rebellion article in there this month.
Get that in there.
Definitely the boys need a palate cleanser.
They do, yeah. Center page and then Spanish-American War. So it's just what the boys need. Oh, and we should mention as well before we jump off the new T-shirt design that's dropped. Oh
yeah, so we've got a new. We've gone for a nice big, bold, simple T-shirt design to celebrate the 150. We are dropping it this week, so check out fightingonfilm.com. It's available in white, it's available in black and navy, unisex, all sizes, and it's a film reel frame with Fighting on Film, the war movie podcast, written in the middle of it, and I think it looks good. I like it. I've ordered
it looks
one,
lovely.
So,
Matt designed it in house, and that's available for under £20. We try and keep them as cheap as we can.
Kept it really cheap on this one.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other ones up on there already, but this one we've tried to keep really affordable. So if you want to, you can rep the show in T-shirt form.
Yeah, please do. We'd love to see it.
And there's a mug as well. There's a mug.
Oh, and there's a mug. There you go.
Ceramic mug. Exciting times.
You gotta have a brew when you watch a movie, haven't you?
Exactly.
You do.
No stand to until we've had a brew.
Exactly. That used to be a slogan, didn't it? We sort of dropped it.
As we've said since like the third episode. Yeah.
We dropped it for no undiscernible reason. Maybe I should it doesn't always fit, no. Maybe I should just jump into the production this week.
I tell you what, I'll give a little bit of context on what the film's about first.
That's probably a good idea.
Because it's such an obscure subject. So it's set in 1906 during the Moro Rebellion, and the Moro were a predominantly Muslim group in the Philippines. The rebellion followed the Philippine-American War, which was a result of the Spanish-American War, because Spain ceded ownership of the Philippines to the US, along with a couple of other protectorates and colonies, essentially, after Spain's defeat in 1898. And then essentially the Philippines become like an unincorporated protectorate, a territory. Right. And they are essentially later on called a Commonwealth, but they're essentially a protectorate of the United States. And there's an insurgency by the Moro from about well, essentially from as soon as the Americans arrive through to about 1913.
Okay.
And the film is set in, as I said, 1906, and it follows a isolated fort in the I think it's in Mindanao, in the forest, and the Moro are trying to lure the Americans out of the fort because they can't attack the fort because it's too strong.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting parallels with, later approaches to counterinsurgency, where they try and train up the local
Yeah.
forces to replace American forces, because we've seen that again in Vietnam and Afghanistan with varying degrees of success.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Like a
I just thought
proto
this film was,
ISAF, aren't they? The
yeah,
constabulary.
it's just a really interesting film in that there's so many parallels with what would follow, and they tried the same approaches. But there's lots for us to talk about in terms of Ali Kit.
Oh yeah,
Interesting
some good stuff in there.
colonialism, imperialism themes, and also filmmaking wise. So yeah, dive in, Rob.
So the film was produced by Samuel Goldwyn, really famous Polish producer. That golden Hollywood era, the 30s, 40s. It's distributed by United Artists, and Goldwyn also produced like 30s and 40s hits such as Raffles in 39 with David Niven, Pride of Yankees, another Gary Cooper movie, and 1943 is The First of the Few, which is the film about the creation of the Spitfire, also starring David Niven. So it's directed by Californian director Henry Hathaway, who directed 7 Cooper pictures during his career, including The Life of a Bengal Lancer, which this film is kind of like a bit of a retread.
A little bit, yeah.
1937's The Souls at Sea. He also directed a few war films as well in the 40s and 50s, including 1944's Wing and a Prayer, 1951's The Desert Fox, and then 1971's Raid on Rommel, which had Burton in it, if you remember.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a bad one.
One of Burton's many desert war films.
Yeah.
Did a
Maybe
couple,
it's
didn't he?
sober him up in the desert, perhaps. Maybe that's why they
The
they
Heat,
got
the
him in.
Heat.
The
Yeah.
Heat. Cinematography was by Hungarian-born Rudolf Mate, or Mate, not quite sure how you say that one, who worked on Sahara. That one's coming soon to the pod. The Pride of the Yankees and Foreign Correspondent, which, good films, good, decent cinematography for its day. There's some nice shots in there. The film cost $2 million, massive budget for its time. Gary Cooper was paid over $480,000 of that, becoming the highest paid actor that year. The shoot took 200 days, longer than the actual Spanish-American War itself, and was filmed by Samuel Goldwyn Studios in West Hollywood and other Californian locations, and the sets cost $200,000. This is no small production. So I've got a little thing from the Kinematograph Weekly detailing more on the production. So they say sound effects for Samuel Goldwyn's production in real glory are being carried on 22 cables stretched under 1.5 million gallons of running water for the Philippine sequences. The feat of electrical construction was completed under the direction of Thomas Moulton, chief of Goldwyn's sound department. The set, comprising 6 acres, was built by a crew of 500 men under Ralph Angel, studio construction foreman, working from US Army photographs. The lagoon required 40,000 square feet of asphalt and is 400 feet long and 6 feet deep. 6-inch head of water will pour over the dam constantly, and a 5-ton boom set on a pontoon was designed to give the cameras natural movement in following actions. Wow. Yeah. So this is like crazy.
That great tracking shot of when they're attacking the fort, isn't there? And it kind of like rolls backwards as they come on. That's quite a good shot.
It's really, really good. And it was also reported in the Falkirk Herald on July 5th, 1939, that 150 pounds of black hair had to be sourced for the film after Goldwyn found that his Filipino extras had contemporary short hairstyles, and he got 200 wigs made. And apparently there was like a scarce amount of like black hair for use in movies, and apparently most of it at the time was being used for this film.
What a weird fact. There.
I know. I just came across it and I was like, that's got to go in. And the article that it was in, it was like, oh, it may annoy some that you can't get any black hair right now, and it's because of this. So I was like, interesting.
Yes, I can see everyone was very put out by that.
We thought the Falkirkians were up in arms. It was released on September 29th, 1939, and December 26th, 1939 here in the UK. It was later reissued under the title A Yank in the Philippines, but it was withdrawn in 1942 by the Motion Picture Division of the Office of War Information, as the Moros were now allies of the US after they entered the war in 41. So they didn't want to have any bad blood between them, so that the film got sort of withdrew. And there was quite some controversy, actually, relating to the scene where the prisoner is threatened to be buried in a pigskin. And this was said to be from a memoir from General Pershing called My Life Before the War. And apparently a Muslim fighter had supposedly been buried next to a dead pig, but apparently that claim's since been debunked and discredited by historians.
Yeah,
and
there's
apparently
claims about bullets getting dipped in
that's
pig
another
fat and
thing.
stuff like that. So it's haram and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, but that's all apparently that's all been debunked, and the film has sort of propped up this myth of US troops doing that, but apparently it didn't happen, according to sources. Which is interesting. Yeah, I couldn't find any solid stuff on that, but it's there nonetheless. So the retro review is from Kinematograph Weekly, November 30, 1939, and they lead with spectacular romantic comedy melodrama, reenacting many of the events and circumstances that led to the colonization of the Philippines by the Americans. The central characters have foibles of their own, and these decorate the story background. The many interests, none of them, unduly hampered by history, collaborate as the yarn methodically develops into the promotion of as thrilling and exhilarating climax as any yet seen on the screen. The resolute, if belated, conquest of box office spectacle is led magnificently by Gary Cooper. He and the first-rate supporting cast are seen at their best. Star values seal the entertainment's certain success and excellent popular booking. That's as clippy as a review you're ever going to get from Kinematograph Weekly. They love a clippy review, don't they?
How did they describe the film genre-wise at the beginning there?
A spectacular romantic comedy melodrama.
A romantic comedy melodrama. That is so far off point.
I know. It's
that is
not
bizarre.
really that. There's a love triangle in there, I know that, but it's not.
There's elements of a lot of things, but we'll talk about that later on, I'm sure.
So the One Word reviews are back this week after a week off, and we've got a few, not as many as in the past, but I think this movie is one that probably not many have seen. So our Burgos goes with Juramentados. Yep. Stephen O'Neill said, still waiting on Play Dirty. We'll get to that one, don't worry. Ian McClellan said, wish list. Paul said, P. Burns said, new to me. Does that count as one word? You put like hyphens in, so I guess it does. Simon Whippet put young Cooper, and Ian Gorry goes with unknown. So it's a bit of a mixed bag there.
Yeah, I don't think many people have seen this one, which is classic FOF. There we go.
Classic. It's Matthew's fault this week, not mine.
It is. It's available on Amazon, I believe, and I think there might also be a version of it up on YouTube. There's a number of different ones.
YouTube. There's a few versions of it up there, to be fair.
I think perhaps it's out of copyright. I do not know.
It could be.
But there's a lot of versions of it up on there, but definitely it is on Amazon as well. I guess that leads us into cast.
It does, yeah.
So as we already know, it's led by Gary Cooper, who plays Dr. Bill Canavan, who throughout I thought was Dr. Bill Caravan, which not quite correct. And he plays like the most combatant, non-combatant known to man.
Yeah, he loves drawing his pistol.
Where he's like a doctor who basically just takes over command towards the end of the film.
He's essentially playing a cowboy, though, isn't it, really?
They all are. And Goldwyn actually described the film as a Western.
Yeah, you can see it.
I was reading bits of some of David Niven's biographies and his own autobiography. And he talks about his role in this, where he describes it as simply a good part. He doesn't go into any more detail about the film at all. He just basically skips on to Raffles, which understandably, because that was the lead part for him.
Yeah.
So as I said, Gary Cooper, Wings 1927, Legion of the Condemned 28, Morocco 1930, A Farewell to Arms in 1932, The Lives of a Bengal Lancer, which we mentioned a moment ago, 1935, Beau Guest 38, Sergeant York in 1941, From the Bell Tolls in 43, Unconquered in 47, Task Force in 49, Distant Drums in 51, and They Came to Kedora in 1959, which is really interesting one we'll have to cover at some point, about Medal of Honor recipients. And he's escorting them back to get their medals, and
nice.
It turns out that they're all not. It's kind of like Meet Your Heroes, kind of thing, and he's like, I need to get them back, but they're all turning out to be not the best people. Really interesting movie.
Sounds good. That
David
like
Niven,
Gary
of course. Yeah, Gary Cooper's pretty good. I don't think he's as tour de force in this as he could have been.
No, he's not. As Tony Soprano said, the strong silent type.
Yeah. There's not a lot for him to do, really.
No, there's not. That's it. Apparently this was maybe Goldwyn sort of like stealing him from bigger projects to sort of get him in this. Couldn't really get a lead on that, but it seemed like Cooper wasn't too pleased to be doing Bo Guest the year before and then essentially be doing kind of the same thing. He does
have a run of doing this sort of film, that's for sure. Like an adventure, military-based film.
Well, the swashbuckling adventurers were popular back then, weren't they, as well?
They were popular. David Niven's character is Lieutenant Terence McCool.
What a name!
What I mean, that's literally they could just call him Niven, like at this point, like because he's playing Niven as he always
Terence
does.
McBastard, no.
And I love the way they actually introduce his character, because they do that classic trope of showing the photograph of the character in like a dossier.
Yeah,
and I'm like, great. This has got to be like one of the earliest examples of a military film doing a photograph in a dossier.
A cliche, maybe it created the cliche. We'll
it could be like, because the general puts down like a series of like personnel folders.
Get me McCool. Yeah,
I need McCool, and then he describes him as like a one-man army.
Yeah,
which you'd never heard David Niven described as a one-man army before, but love it.
I say I'm a one-man army. How lovely for me. How lovely.
So, of course, other military films from Niven's career include The Charge of the Light Brigade, 1936, definitely one we have to cover. Dawn Patrol, 38, definitely another one we have to cover. The Way Ahead, we have covered. A Matter of Life and Death in 46, Soldiers 3 in 51, which is a good adventure film. Carrington VC in 55.
Love that.
Guns of Navarone in 1961, which we might be covering soon. I don't know. The Captive City in The Captive City in 1962. The Best of Enemies, which we watched recently and were pleasantly surprised by.
It's so funny.
Just needed a little bit more to it, a little bit of substance
towards the end.
Action
scene near the end to really cement it, but it was still good.
Before Winter Comes, 69, Paper Tiger, 1975, which you mentioned in our episode about the Peyton film.
Yeah.
Escape to Athena, 1979, and of course, The Sea Wolves in 1980. The cast is rounded out by Andrea Leeds, who plays Linda Hartley, the love interest. She retired the next year after she got married.
Oh, wow.
Reginald Owen plays Captain Steve Hartley, her father. He played Dr. Watson in the 1932 adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. He was in Conquest, which you mentioned earlier, Rob, in 37. A Yank in the RAF in 41. Mrs. Miniver the year after.
Wow.
Simon Tim Brittany in 43. He was in The Three Musketeers in 1948. Derby's Rangers in 1958.
Nice.
And he was Major General Sir Brian Teagler in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, which we have actually covered on the show.
Yes, love it.
And then we've got Broderick Crawford, who plays Lieutenant Larson. He was in Bo Guest, Last of the Comanches in 53.
Flower Boy, that one.
Up from the Beach in 1965, which is one we've got on the list, on the Fabled film list.
That's a hard one to track down, that, apparently.
Yeah. Mutiny at Fort Sharp, 1966. Guerrilla Strike Force, a Filipino film from 1987 as well. Ooh. That was his last sort of military role. Might be one to like dig out that one, I think.
Yeah.
Rudy Robles plays Lieutenant Yabo, who is the only Filipino actor that has any lines in this film.
Yeah, shocking.
The representation of Filipinos with speaking roles in this film is dire.
Quite bad. Yeah, aged very badly.
And then we've got Vladimir Sokolov, who plays Datu, who is kind of like the Alipang, who is the moral leader. Datu's character is essentially like an advisor or lieutenant. He's like the second in command. He's also a bit of a spy. Sokolov was one of those ethnically ambiguous actors of the Hollywood golden era, where he could play almost anything, like European,
Yeah.
Mexican,
And they
Filipino.
made him play everyone they could as well. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah. So he was in
Hollywood
West.
hire indigenous actors challenge
Right.
impossible back then.
Impossible. Impossible. Like, I'll talk about that in a second as well.
Mm.
So we got West Front 1918, the 1930 film. He was in that as a background extra. Hell on Earth in 1931, which is a really interesting film that we need to cover. That's another World War One drama. Conquest in 1937, so another nice link there to a film we mentioned earlier. West of Shanghai the same year, Blockade in 1938, which is one of those rare Spanish Civil War movies. It's got Henry Fonda in the lead.
Oh yeah, I think we talked about that before.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of
Yeah.
course, For Whom the Bell Tolls in 43, Passage to Marseille in 44, Back to Bataan in 45, and probably most recognizable to a lot of people for The Magnificent Seven in 1960, where he plays the village elder type.
Yep.
Then we've got Testu Komai. Then we've got Testu Komai, who plays Ali Pang. Again, not a Filipino, playing a Filipino role.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Tell It to the Marines in 1926, The War Correspondent in 1932, West of Shanghai, again with Sokolov in 1937, Task Force with Cooper in 49, and Tank Battalion in 1958.
Oh, nice.
And that kind of rounds out the basic cast. It's really interesting reading about the production of the show, because apparently they cast 1,200 Filipino extras for the film. And you've already mentioned the fact that they had trouble getting the right wigs for them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
New York Times article I found states that they were supervised by Senor Demandante and Mrs. Padres. Padres was the daughter-in-law of the Philippine ambassador to the US at the time.
Oh wow.
So one of the interesting things that kind of sits between cast and production almost is that the Philippine government at the time really weren't pleased with the film and the way it portrayed Filipino soldiers,
No.
the Filipino constabulary in the film. And they repeatedly asked for changes, and Goldwyn was apparently quite reluctant. But I found an issue of the Philippine magazine from 1939, volume 36, number 10, if anyone wants to go and find it. And there's a very short little section which says, President Quezon is informed by cable that from Samuel Goldwyn, Hollywood film producer, that he has taken out scenes in The Real Glory which allegedly reflect on courage of the Filipinos as soldiers, and which were cause of protest voiced through Commissioner Elizalde, who was the Filipino diplomat to the U.S. Congress. He was kind of like a non-voting congressman for the territory, essentially. So it seems that there was some back and forth about various scenes showing how reluctant the Filipino constabulary were to fight the Moro, and that fear of the
It's definitely not in the film,
swordsmen and stuff,
because they're raring to go.
So I mean, there's bits of that in there, isn't there? And then it shows Cooper Riley, showing them the Moro aren't to be feared as much as they,
General Cooper, because he pretty much becomes the commander.
He does, essentially, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I also found a note that kind of quotes the general thoughts of Elizalde, and it says he requested the deletion of the scenes that depicted his people as inferior, morally afraid of the Moro tribe, and reflected in general against the courage of the Commonwealth. So again, kind of iterates how unhappy the Filipino government were to see how Goldwyn and the film had portrayed the constabulary. Interesting stuff. And that basically rounds out cast. I did find out that Niven was on about $1,000 a week.
Wow.
Yeah, on his weekly rate.
Not earning what Cooper was on. Christ.
No, not quite, but pretty good for the day. That's got to be said.
Not bad, grand, yeah. Blimey.
Critics praised Cooper's performance, including Graham Greene, who said he'd never acted better, which
Wow.
is interesting because I feel like he had.
I think he's done better work. I
Yeah.
think they've all done better work.
And then the only other thing I found in terms of cast production, Colonel William Shutan was the technical advisor on the film, and he was the former military governor of Mindanao, where the film's set.
Nice.
And he served during the Spanish-American War and later during the First World War as well.
Wow. So talking about advising and things like that, we should probably move into this week's Alley Tally.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
I quite like seeing the Krag Jorgensen rifles because you don't often see them.
You really do not often see them at all. Like there's a handful of films. There's 4th of April, the Danish movie that has them in. What else has them in? They're prominently in the film They'll Die Advised about the Spanish-American War. They're in that.
Right.
There's not many films.
No, there isn't. They're interesting because they've got that big metal box next to the bolt.
Yeah, it's cool because like that's hinged and it pops out to the side. You don't really see it in the film. You see it a little bit. There's a bit where Ali Pang is kind of like playing with one,
fiddling around. Yeah.
And that little, like, it's hinged and that little box opens out and you just drop the rounds in and you close it. So it's quite a clever design.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I know
you don't have to actually open the action to load the rifle.
That's interesting. Because I know they're from Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah.
And the animation on that is you open the bolt and he puts rounds in. So it must
there's no need. What are you doing, Rockstar?
Hey, can you hear that, Rockstar? Hear that? Take-Two Interactive. You got that wrong. Yeah, no, but it's nice to see them. And I think we did some research and we found that it's a shortened constabulary carbine version.
Yeah, the 1890, was it 96 we found?
Yeah, something like that. Late 1890s, which is nice.
They were taken from like the 1892, the long infantry model, and shortened down and altered by armories and such. Very interesting.
So no, I love it. I think the Alley Tally is interesting because it's the early 1900s and it's something we don't really see in the film, like on film very often. You know, there's hardly any Boer war movies. There's not many Zulu war movies. So, you know, there isn't much representation. Well, I'm sure there is plenty of representation out there of that period. But in terms of what we've covered on the show, we haven't really come across it very often.
Well, as we said at the beginning, there's definitely not many films about this, particular rebellion.
No.
And that's one of the things that drew me to the film, and I really wanted to cover it because it's so interesting in terms of kit that's in there and also the period it's set in. And you get Niven on a Gatling gun.
Oh,
you get David Niven firing not one but two different types of Gatling gun.
Two types of Gatling, yeah.
He's on a grand a week, Rob, and he's also getting to fire Gatling guns.
How lovely for me!
Living the dream
to be firing a Gatling gun. Lovely,
marvelous. Why are our Niven impressions completely nothing like Niven? We're just doing archetypal posh Brit.
Yeah, I say this Gatling gun is rather fun.
Very drunk. Yeah,
you just turn the crank and it goes rat-a-tat-tat.
Oh God! I wish he'd written that in his autobiography.
You turn the crank and it goes rat-a-tat-tat.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love it.
Oh, it's brilliant. No, it's really great to see it though, and it's lovely. I love seeing Gatling guns in anything. I think they're so interesting.
Again, you mostly just see them in westerns, and
yeah, you do.
Perhaps because Goldwyn considered this film a western, he was like, "I need Gatling guns.
We need Gatlings." Because it would have been it would not been Gatlings, would it? Or would it have been?
I think they're plausible. They're definitely plausible for being there. You know, might have been something that was handed over to the constabulary because at that point, they got machine guns and such. But not only do you get the classic Gatling gun with the box magazine at the top, but you also get a Colt Model 1883, which is really cool because it's all brass and it's like the shortened version.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's the pinnacle. That's the pinnacle of the Gatling gun. Like It's evolved
Cadillac of
over
Gatling guns.
the Cadillac of Gatlings. It's the best a man can get in terms of Gatling guns. And it's essentially like they evolved it from about 1865, and the 83 model is lightweight, entirely encased in like brass, and it feeds from an Ackles drum, which is a big, high capacity sort of like donut shaped thing on top of it. Really cool. Possibly like the only one I've ever seen in a film as well.
I like the scene where he brings it in, because I think it implies that they either move the one he's already fired or they've got another one, and they're like putting it up on a high emplacement, and you got like three lads in Niven like trying to put it on the plinth. It's great. I just love seeing it.
I would have loved to have seen him like smash another box magazine into that, the one that's on the parapet.
You get one, you don't get two, do you?
Yeah,
because he calls for more ammunition, doesn't he? And at that point, the Morrow have stolen it.
Yes,
in the world.
We'll talk about the climax, I'm sure.
God, there's parts that annoy me. Anyway, but there's another Niven bit that I absolutely adore, and I had to say it on the alley tally rather than favourite scene. So the bit where the Morrows are stealing the rifles and the ammunition, Niven notices and he goes over, and he's injured already, I think, at this point, or he's because he's had malaria, so
suffering from cholera, isn't he?
Cholera,
at the same time?
That's it. Yeah. And he kind
it's
of
not
goes
going
over.
To stop me.
I know. Bout of cholera won't stop me.
Touch of the cholera won't stop me.
Not me, David McCool Niven. So he draws his Colt Army and he just gives them 6 rounds, and it's the most Western you'll ever see Niven.
It's very 9 men, actually. It's like hip.
It is good.
Firing from the hip.
And it's all like smoke.
Six Morrow.
Oh, it's great. It's just it. I might have to make that a GIF because it's so cool. Just Niven drawing that revolver. So cool.
There's another scene that I really like that's centered around the revolver. So the Colt New Army is a 38 caliber revolver, and it was adopted in like the 1890s to replace the Colt single action army, like the classic Western single action revolver. And there's a great opening sequence in the film where a Morrow swordsman attacks the colonel, cuts him down, and the 3 lieutenants that have arrived to join the command all open fire. So that's like 18 rounds going into this guy, good. And it doesn't drop him. And there's a great little sequence. He finally falls, like after someone else fires a couple of rounds as well. And there's a great sequence where Cooper comes into the mess, and he's just done an autopsy on the Morrow swordsman, and he drops a series of slugs onto the table.
Yeah.
And he says, "I thought I'd missed that chap, but I hadn't. I dug out more lead from him than they could sink a battleship, or something like that."
That's great.
And that is a really interesting inclusion, because there's documented accounts of 38 revolvers not having the stopping power that was needed to stop a fanatic.
Okay, wow.
During the Philippine war and in the insurrection, and that is one of the driving forces that led the US military to move towards the 45 caliber pistol.
Oh, right, okay, interesting.
Because they were searching for that kind of stopping power that was needed.
Urgent
so I thought
procurement issues.
Right.
You could do a whole pod on
started
that.
just reissuing Colt single action armies in 45 Colt.
Right, cool. A bit heavier cartridge.
Yeah, just a big beefy like lead slug.
A beefy boy.
But I just was really fascinated that they included that.
That's nice.
It's a nice detail to include.
I like seeing the gun belts. That's cool. That adds into the Western thing. Bandoliers, the shotgun with the Winchester.
Yeah.
And
there's nothing cooler than when Gary Cooper walks over to that chest for the first time, just casually opens it up and reaches in and pulls out an Winchester
cool.
1897 riot shotgun.
Yeah.
And nonchalantly saunters off.
It's very cool. But then no one ever fires one. I think there's one gets fired once.
Yeah. So there's that sequence, which is very classic adventure movie, where he's being chased by some rebels. He runs across a rope bridge. Of course, it's a rope bridge.
Oh, yeah.
And he fires a single round. He doesn't shoot the guys chasing him. He just shoots the one of the side ropes of the rope bridge, and it snaps, and they plunge to their deaths. And he hangs on for grim life.
A guy falls down as well. I always think about that stuntman there. I'm like, that didn't look safe. He just drops
I know,
like
right?
30 foot or something. And the bit, oh my God, the bits where the Morrow, like in Ironclad, it just made me laugh. The
Oh
bits
my
where the
God,
Morrow
don't.
catapult themselves
It's
into
insane.
the fort. And there's a shot of a guy hitting the side of a bit of set, and it looks genuinely painful. And
I
then one
know.
of them gets flung through a glass window.
You're ruining my favorite scene.
Sorry, but it's
That was
just
my pick.
laughable. I'm like, what are they
It
doing?
really is. There's some proper gash like Hollywood stuff going on. There's a bit where a guy throws a spear downwards, and it cuts to the pickup shot of it hitting him,
up.
and it goes upwards into him.
I loved it. I love stuff like that. I just love it. Like
The bits with the when Mike Miguel and the young lad like stops Cooper from going any further and triggers a booby trap, and it's like just some spears that get fired out of a bamboo tube. Like what is throwing those?
I thought you meant the bit where Gary's pushing that spy along. He stops because
that's even better.
a punji pit.
Straight into a punji pit, yeah.
And Gary gives you the most like shove ever. Like, come on.
He's like, why aren't you moving? I've completely forgotten about the traps. Why aren't you moving? Pushes Datu and goes straight into a pit.
Just made me laugh.
That was gnarly, actually. Like that
was good.
There's a couple of shots in this film where they really linger. So there's a bit where, spoilers, one of the lieutenants is killed trying to destroy the dam. A dam is built.
1939, Matt. I don't think it's a spoiler.
Yeah, it's probably not a spoiler.
It's September 39. People had a bit more going on than what the real glory was happening. There's this bloke called Hitler, and he was going a bit mad.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, they didn't get around to watching it because things were going on, Rob.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
it's a spoiler. So one of the lieutenants is sort of like being shown to be eaten by ants, like his body's being eaten by ants. Which is
apparently the scene had 20,000 ants. I found out
apparently so, and they had like the Hollywood's top insect guy.
Top insect. Goldwyn was sparing no money. Goldwyn was like, I've got $2 million, and I'm going to go in.
We're doing this. That shot that we used about 2/15 of a second of, because we couldn't get it past.
I can't make fake ants. Okay, I gotta get 20,000 ants. All right.
Get me a fake skull and 20,000
many ants for this Cooper picture.
I need 20,000 didgeridoos. And it's, if you know that reference, then more power to you. And then there's the bit where there's a very brief bit where you see the colonel getting hacked, and then there's the major that also gets hacked to death as well.
Yeah, it's quite brutal.
Some really actually quite brutal, like visceral bits in
especially
this.
The bit where Cooper finds all the chaps that have been cut to bits up on the trail.
Spears in them and stuff.
And the guy's been like buried up to his head, and it looks like he's been stabbed and all that. It's quite, for 39.
Yeah, that's the ant scene. That's the dude getting eaten by ants.
That is the ants. Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. Some of
the ants were busy.
A bit for me. They were chomping away. They were a lovely old time.
They buried him fast, didn't they? Because it pans up and there's the orchid that he loves. So, again, bit of context for anyone who hasn't seen
Flower
the film.
Boy, so boring.
One of the lieutenants is obsessed with orchids, and he comes across as a very sort of like simple soul, but he loves them orchids.
He's like Chumley Warner, isn't he? He's just
really
a bit bumbling fool. Yeah.
Last thing on the alley tally, I actually two things. One, the Hotchkiss mountain gun that gets briefly used to like blow a hole in the wall.
That's nice.
Where did they get that from?
God knows. God knows.
They're like struggling to get Craig Jorgensen's, but they've got a Hotchkiss mountain gun.
Well, I thought it'd be having handy.
Datu's like, we need these amazing multi-shot Craig Jorgensen rifles, and Ali Pang's like, oh, is it as good as the Hotchkiss mountain gun that we have?
Hotchkiss mountain gun I somehow purloined. Yeah.
And then it just, a shout out to the eternal look of bandoliers, slouch hats or bush hats.
It's a strong look.
And like jungle KD type.
It's nice.
And puttees. There's a bit where Gary Cooper says, "Have you seen my puttees?" And I was like, wow, okay.
Wow.
This is quite the film.
Yeah. And a shout out to Niven just not doing any accent. I just love it.
Yeah, Niven's
did he ever do an accent in his entire career?
I've never seen a film where Niven hasn't done Mid-Atlantic or really British.
No, because there's no other movie. There's no movie on
The
Earth.
closest he gets is Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, yeah. But it's
And he
just
doesn't
funny
even
to
really
me.
go in for that.
Niven's just Niven, isn't he?
I
It
love it.
doesn't matter who you
Yeah.
are playing. You just Niven, aren't you? So great.
Yeah, he does that thing that Tom Hanks now does, where he's Tom Hanks.
Yeah, actually, that's very true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like you've
Yes.
cast Tom Hanks, you've cast David Niven. David Niven's going to do David Niven, and it's going to
Yeah.
be great.
Denzel
essentially.
Washington's in that
But I think,
realm
as
of
always,
actors too.
yes, he totally
Yeah,
is.
he
Yeah,
is.
totally is. But as always, we've sort of spiraled into favorite scenes and final
little
thoughts,
bit.
and we've meshed them together in a melange.
It's
So
our show. Do what we want.
let's go into favorite scenes.
Hello, I'm Al Murray, and you're listening to Fighting on Film, the world's #1 war film podcast.
Rob, what was your favorite scene?
I mentioned it before, but Niven on a Gatling gun. You ain't going to see that in any other movies. I also like during the battle that more chaps get beaten to death with rifles than get shot with them for a bit, and that really leaned into the swashbuckly style of it to me.
There's a lot of hand to hand.
And then there's also a nice bit where Alapang is trying to escape, and Cooper looks down at one of the Filipino soldiers, and he goes, stop him.
Yabo. Yeah,
Yabo, that's it, Yabo.
Mm.
And Yabo's got his Winchester aimed. And I was like, yeah, Yabo, blast him away. Like, come on, I want to see it.
I so wanted to see him slam fire that Winchester like 3 or 4 times.
You get a complete fake out, and Yabo beats him to death with the buttstock.
Yeah.
And he falls in the river and drowns. And I was like, why didn't you work? I was expecting Indiana Jones, sword against shotgun wins. I was expecting that kind of thing. But it surprised me. This film was full of surprises. I didn't hate it. I love the end battle because it was so strange. Like when men were like, we have no ammo left, but men were running around with clearly like 50 to 60
like
rounds
full
left.
bandoliers. And there's like a scene where like there's a Filipino woman that is like, oh no, there's no ammo, and she's holding up boxes that clearly have rifle rounds and cartridges in those boxes.
If they didn't have Niven, they'd have lost, because Niven was the only one trying. He was running ammo around. He was firing that Gatling like no one's business. He goes out like a pro, wanting more ammo as well. My favorite favorite part of the movie is just Niven. I just love him. But I've got more to say.
There's a bit where he's like, he's struggling with the onset of cholera, and then he's determined to go off and find Gary Cooper, who's gone off into the jungle on his own. And he gets out. He has the sick moment of where he opens up the chest and pulls out the 1897.
It's very cool.
He goes over, takes a swig out of a bottle of whiskey, and then collapses on the floor due to the onset of cholera.
Yeah.
He's great in it. He really is. I would have liked more, but we'll talk about that.
A Victorian disease for a Victorian man.
Right.
Yes.
I think my favorite scene is it's a combination of that scene where the opening scene where they shoot the Morrow, and I talked about how that's a nice inclusion because of the debate about stopping power of pistols, etc. But then also, as I said earlier, my real favorite is the bit where they ironclad it up a bit and catapult loads of dudes.
It's just so funny
at the church.
I wasn't expecting.
And there's bits where like one just whacks the mantle of the church and slides down it, and the camera lingers on him.
It looked really
and
painful.
There's dudes like hitting trees and hitting parapet, and like that's a baller move. That's
it is a
hell of
spectacle.
tactic.
That ending is,
it's that classic 30s Hollywood thing where the climax is going to be a big set piece, and it does deliver. There's
all had happened up to that point. Really, come on, it's
interpersonal stuff. It's one-on-one stuff.
There's a love triangle.
It's love triangle. It's
where Flower Boy thinks he's got any fucking attempts at getting that woman. It ain't happening.
Plot twist, Rob. She's the one that she would have gone with, but he died.
Probably. Yeah. I want to name an orchid after you, creep. What are you doing?
It was a different time. I really love actually that they set up her character by like Cooper asks her, "Why are you here?" And she says, well, there was a big earthquake in San Francisco. And I realized that I wanted to see my father again. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So we're using the great earthquake of San Francisco as like context. And
I'd
I
rather
liked
be
that. I
here
just
than
did that.
there. Yeah. She was a good character, actually. I
was.
didn't like
She was
that.
quite good.
She wasn't a damsel in distress. She actually had a lot more going on and was just not
She
there.
helped. She's actually shown speaking Spanish as well. So she's intelligent. It might even pass the test because there's a scene where two women have a conversation with each other, and it's not entirely about men.
Yes.
So that might be a
God, yeah.
rare one.
That's been a long time coming on the show. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well done, Samuel Goldwyn. You're trailblazer, you.
I think it's very brief, and then it pivots back to talking about the men.
Yeah.
But not bad. Good effort.
No, it's good. It's there. Yeah.
There's that classic trope of the wife arrives and he's so close to retirement, Rob. He's so close. Both of them are like
they are.
The young lady's father's close to retirement.
Proper old codgers at this point, too, aren't they?
And he dies. The major dies. He's killed just as he's trying to buy some nice silk for his wife, who he hasn't seen in many years.
He gets chefed up, doesn't he?
Painful. Yeah. Terrible. But yeah, I did that final set piece is, I think, the high point of the film.
Of course it is. Like, there's nothing else going on. I'm not going to pick Gary Cooper battling Connor on his own for half hour. That's the most boring.
Why not?
We're going to go to final thoughts now.
I'm going to argue here.
It was so fucking boring.
It wasn't boring, Rob. It was quite interesting because they're like, he's like, we're going to dig pits. We're going to put carbolic acid and we're going to clean the rooms.
Learning how to fight cholera is interesting, but
there's a bit where like they've put lime at the base of the mess steps, and David Niven shuffles his feet in the lime to go before he goes in, and don't drink out of the cholera.
From a technical standpoint, interesting, but to watch it for half an hour in the middle of my action and westerny hybrid.
What's amazing is that it's not only do they do an extended sequence of it, but there's also a montage of him like working as well within that extension. And you're like,
we need like a pushing
involved.
to the limit. We need like Rocky pushing to the limit over that, because it really felt like it needed it.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of montages,
fighting cholera. You got to dig the lime pits when you're fighting cholera.
Oh my God. There's another montage at the beginning where the troops are getting trained as well.
That's good. I wanted more of that, because
that's the whole point of them being there, to train.
Exactly. This is where my final
constabulary
thoughts come in, right? I can put up with a love triangle because it's a 30s movie. They do it, right? They can't help it, right? They're just in style, right? So you've got the love triangle.
It's actually a love quadrangle.
A quadrangle as well, yep. So there's a lot going on, and that wasn't insufferable, because there's some funny moments where they're all trying to like outbest each other, and Niven's winning, then Cooper's winning, then Flower Boy comes in and tries to name an orchid after her, and it's all a bit awkward. It's funny, it's good, well written, and then obviously Cholera bit comes in, and I was just like, God, and I'm like,
changes the tone a bit, doesn't it?
It really does. And then after that, you get one, I think it's a throwaway line from either Niven or Cooper, where they go, we need to train these men up. Why aren't we training these men? I was like, you just spent half hour fighting fucking cholera. You could have cut that out, even if it might have happened. I don't know. Like, I'm not clued up on the American-Spanish War. But
it's the Moro Rebellion, Rob. It's not
Moro Rebellion, sorry. But where's your bit of like Niven and Flower Boy and Cooper training them up, showing them shooting, showing them tactics, all things like that? You need more of it.
There's bits where it's mostly drill, isn't it? And it's mostly drill, and and that whole sequence is a vehicle for Cooper interfering with the training, almost to the annoyance of the commanding officer, where he's by the book and he wants them trained
going blind
a certain way. Yeah. That's a very unusual like plot point as well.
And then they drank
I don't know
the
why
log
that's
on the
included.
last bit.
Oh
They
my god, I know.
essentially like
Oh god,
Tylee.
isn't it cold at the end where Cooper comes up and goes, "I wish you could have seen it." I'm like, oh my god,
He was
Gary,
like, see,
Gary.
I felt it. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
quite cool.
like, wow. And then at the end, they've got him with a pair of very 19th century sunglasses on.
Yeah, that was cool.
Like, he's blind now because he's wearing the sunglasses.
But yeah, it was so weird. And then the movie just ends after that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I just found it. I didn't hate it. I
No.
quite enjoyed it on some level. I love any movie Niven's in. I just think he's great.
Mhm.
One of
It's
those
Niven on a
eternal,
Gatling gun. That's why I
one of
wanted to
those
do it.
eternal British.
I didn't say it was a good film.
Actors.
I just said
No,
it was
no. But
interesting.
it was just it couldn't. It just didn't know what genre it wanted to be. Was it a melodrama? Was it a romantic comedy? Was
God,
it
I know.
action? Was it a western? And there wasn't enough of everything. Niven and I'm gonna keep calling him Flower Boy, doing a massive disservice to that actor. But it's the only way I can remember him. They just don't do anything much until the
No,
end.
they don't.
They're kind of just there. No wonder he was on a day rate because he didn't have much to do. And Cooper
Yeah.
is good, but Cooper is I don't want to say like miscast, but he certainly could be doing a lot more.
He can't. I think you have a point there because you could have had. There's a couple of other people you could have had in that role at that point.
Errol Flynn.
Errol Flynn, absolutely. Errol Flynn would have been on point, and we would have had a Wings, or is it Dawn Patrol rather?
That would have been nice. Yeah.
Element of it with Niven and Errol Flynn like bouncing off one another. That would have been peak.
That would have been cool.
But yeah, you're right. It totally is. It's a very confused film in that it's a Western war film, medical drama, adventure picture.
Yeah. Wow.
Rolled into one.
Yeah.
And not all of those themes come together harmoniously.
No, they don't. You could cut out you could chop the collar a bit out, and I don't think the movie changes at all.
Yeah. I honestly, you could rewrite that bit because the way the cholera epidemic begins because the Morrow Dam, the river that flows through the village, and causes a shortage of water, so that
the water's fouled up.
Yeah, and that causes like various different problems.
Yeah.
And illnesses and the cholera begins, and then there's an epidemic, and then that is your mid film dip.
It sags so much. Yeah. I'm just like, oh my god. And then just that bit really threw me off. And I was like willing for some action. And then you get it. It's a bit muddled, isn't it?
Yeah, there's like a sojourn where they go up into the hills to blow up the dam, and
but I know at the time it was really well received. People loved it. It's the reviews were so glowing. I mean, you can do a lot worse.
I think audiences at the time were more used to that kind of melange of themes and styles.
I think that's it. And we do say that a lot on the show.
Probably nowadays when we're more expecting of a more, straightforward, not having comedic elements in your film that includes cholera and, insurgency.
Yeah. And maybe treat the Morrows with a bit more respect than just
we got to talk about
the
fact that it is a very
it's very of its time,
very much a movie of its time. There's a lot of imperialism, there's a lot of othering going on. Cooper insists on calling a young Morrow boy Miguel Mike throughout the whole film.
Gary, my mate.
There's one bit where the two officers are talking about the militia and he calls them all little brothers, which is very like,
I was like, this. What in the 1939 is this? I was thinking when I was watching it.
And to be fair, it does reflect probably attitudes of the period that the film's set in,
without a doubt. Yeah,
but again, it's all of its time, and it's interesting to see imperialism, colonialism reflected in a film,
especially like American colonialism, because they were kind of new boys to that, weren't they? Really,
that's a very a very rare thing to see on film as well. I mean,
yeah,
it's a fascinating film with a lot of interesting things going on. And it's got
right for a remake,
gun.
I think. One of those films I'd like to remake with a bit more.
Minus the cholera section.
Yeah, cut the cholera.
Truncated.
Yeah.
Also, California has never looked more like the Philippines.
Oh, it's amazing. Just for the set alone is incredible.
Yeah.
You know, making that canal, it's a real feat of filmmaking. And doing it at a time
Did
when
you
couldn't
read the
fake
bits? Did you read the bits where Douglas Fairbanks and a number of other like former studio heads were like complaining that Goldwyn was going to destroy the backlot that they built in the
No.
20s?
No.
I read in one of Niven's biographies that there was some backlash around a lot of old like outdoor sets being demolished to build that big set. And Fairbanks was
Goldwyn just like, tear it all down for my Cooper picture.
Right. And Fairbanks was like talking to American like art museums and stuff and being like, can we not like get some of this saved and get in a collection somewhere? Apparently.
Fairbanks got his knickers in a twist. I'm trying to make this Cooper picture here. knock down that wall. Do as I say.
Oh, and then finally, one thing we missed out on the alley tally was the dynamite candle that Gary throws at one point.
That was quite cool. Yeah,
quite funny.
That was good.
But I think that's it.
I think we've run out of steam on The Real Glory, 1939. Yeah. And yeah, another review there for you. I mean, I didn't dislike it, but I didn't like it. I think that's fair to say. Like,
it's an interesting film. I'm not going to say it's the best film, but it's certainly probably the most interesting film made about that topic. Yeah,
pre-pod list that we made. It's finally been ticked off.
Yes.
And yes, and next week, as we mentioned at the top of the show, it's our 150th episode. So we are going to be reviewing a classic, a sort of Avengers level event film of its day.
150 episodes of us
150 war films, and we've still not done any real big uns. we have. We've done like Bridge Too Far. We've done things like that. That we have. But you know, the show's motto is that we want to cover everything obscure and classic, as well as the big hitters, because we said when we started the show, if you did the big hitters, you'd be done in a year. And you'd have to.
It's very true. It's very true.
You have to mix it in.
You know, whenever we talk to people that listen to the show, I'm always struck by the fact that 80% of them always say it's great that you highlight so many films that
That's the reason. That's the whole point of the show. Where else are you going to get an hour on The Real Glory? I can't think anywhere else. If we don't do it, someone else will. So we might as well be us. There you go, folks. Right. So do join us next week for our 150th episode, where we'll be covering Guns of Navarone, if we didn't already mention it. Niven again, Baker, Peck. There you go, Gregory Peck. Yeah.
Quinn.
And I have a Cinerama press book for Guns of Navarone that I'll be dusting off for that episode. Maybe read a few paragraphs from that. It's colour. It cost me like £5 from a little charity shop a few years ago. Been sitting on it. Looking forward to dusting that one off and joining Niven and Co again. To knock out a big gun on a big mountain. Lovely.
What more could you want, honestly?
What more could you? All the best war movies, when you think about it, are on mountains and cliffs. Like, Where Eagles Dare.
It adds jeopardy. What can I say?
It really does, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly. So, thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next week for the 150th.
And if you haven't listened to all 150 episodes, head to fightingonfilm.com, where you can find all of them on our website, and you can catch up just in time for next week.
That way, you'd have to do a lot, but no, fair play. Bye.
Bye.